Hello everyone, welcome to another online lesson. Today's lesson will be focusing on inference of content, one of the most basic skill that you will first learn when you enter secondary school. So if you're a lower sec student learning history, or if you're upper sec student who just learned social studies or currently learning upper sec history, you would realize that inference of content is relevant to you. So what is an inference? An inference is essentially a logical conclusion that can be obtained using the details from a source. It's very similar to doing deductions. It's something that we do in social studies, in history, and even in our everyday lives. What I like to tell my students is that when we are doing an inference, because it's something like a deduction and we are coming up with a logical conclusion, we are like mini detectives. So for example of how we do an inference in our daily life, Miss Rose, me, always comes to school by 7 a.m. Yesterday, she wasn't in the staff room even though it was already 7:20 a.m. What can you infer from this? Now, you would say things like, oh, I can infer that she's late today, or I can infer that she's absent today. Another example of what we'll always infer in daily life is if you're walking around a shopping center and we see that, wow, this restaurant has a lot of people. Then the first inference you'll probably come up with is, okay, wow, the food here must be really good. That's why a lot of people are dying to enter inside this restaurant. So how do I know if it's an inference question? These are all the types of inference questions that they can potentially ask. Things like, what can you infer about the source or the topic? What can you tell about the source or topic? What does the source tell you about the topic? Or what can you learn from the source? So the moment you see any of these questions, you should immediately know that yes, this is an inference question. So how do I come up with inferences? Step number one, read your provenance. The caption of the source contains all the important information related to the source. So I always tell my students that provenance contains all the hints that's very essential for you to come up with the correct inference. So this is the example that we are looking at first. Whatever that is highlighted or written in source B or at the caption with source B there, which is the provenance. So the provenance states that this source is a picture of a gold earring and an amulet that were uncovered at Fort Canning Hill. The earrings and amulets were from 14th century Singapore. So now that you have read your provenance, what I'll need you to do is do see, think, wonder. I'm sure a lot of you guys you have done see, think, wonder with your teacher before. So do see, think, wonder, but just without the wonder. What do I mean by that and why? Is because whatever that you write for the seeing section, what you see in the source are things that you will be using as evidence. Whatever you write for the thinking part, because those are conclusions and deductions that you are making, that is your inference. So this is where I'll expect students to do quick annotations at the side of the source before you start answering your question. So for example, still using this photo of the gold earring and amulet, I would say that I see gold earring and amulets and that they are found in Fort Canning Hill. So I would think that gold equals rich, or maybe they're royalties, and these people were living in Fort Canning Hill in 14th century Singapore. So based on whatever that I see that I think, I can start working on my inference paragraph. So how do I answer my inference paragraph? I will answer in the CIEE format. What is a CIE format? C is clever starter, where I follow the question or I reword the question. Second is inference, and then I use evidence from the source, and then I explain. I always tell students that explanation is where you tie up your evidence with your inference together. So in your explanation, it shouldn't be just be a mere repetition of your inference. In your explanation, you should really show your thought process, really show how your evidence really supports your inference and show people that your inference is correct. So you need to tell your explanation how, based on whatever you see in the source, you were able to come up with that logical conclusion. So for example, if the question is asking you, study source B, what can you infer about the people living in Singapore in the 14th century? The parts that I've written in red, those are the parts that you will need to reword when you first start writing your inference question. So that should be your clever starter. So my answer will be I can infer that the people living in Singapore were rich. So my inference is that they were rich. This can be seen in source A where it shows gold earring and amulets found on Fort Canning Hill. That's my evidence. This tells me that there were rich people living in Singapore as gold is expensive and the people wearing the earring and amulets could afford it. That is my explanation. Now, I will show you another example using a social studies source. Source A shows a local cartoon about Singapore citizenship process, and the question is asking me, study source A, what does this source tells me about the process of applying for citizenship in Singapore? So if I were to do my see and my think, I would see the escalator. I would think that this probably refers to the journey of getting citizenship. I see hourglass and how people are stuck at the top part of the hourglass and how only one person go through. So I'll probably think that okay, I guess this means because hourglass usually represents time, so maybe it's trying to suggest that it's a very time consuming process. And the fact that there's so many people jammed out at the top but only one go through, I'll probably come up to a conclusion that maybe the citizenship in Singapore is very hard to get and not everyone will be accepted. So those are the different inferences that I can come up with. Now my job is to formulate it into a paragraph. So this is the question again, study source A. What does this source tells me in the process of applying for citizenship in Singapore? Similarly, the words in red are what you should be writing for your clever starter because that is the question, that is the part of the question that you'll need to reword. So based on whatever that I've read for my seeing and my thinking part, I will just need to write it out in a paragraph. So this source tells me that the process of applying for citizenship in Singapore is difficult as not everyone can get accepted. This can be seen in source A where it shows that at Hourglass where people got stuck and only one person got through. That's my evidence. This tells me that applying for citizenship in Singapore is not an easy process as it is tough to get through as seen in how everyone in the hourglass is not able to pass through to the other side. That is my explanation. Now, just a reminder, because inference of content is 5 marks, you will need to give me 2 inference paragraph CI, which means that you're essentially doing CIEE 2 times. I will always recommend students to spend 10 to 15 minutes spent per question. Don't spend too long on inference of content because if you spend too long on inference of content, you might accidentally shortchange yourself for other questions and you'll find yourself rushing for other questions. So always be mindful of the time, spend 10 maximum 15 minutes for inference question. But of course, if let's say after 10 or 15 minutes pass and you realize that okay, I can only come up with one inference of content, I really can't think of another inference of content answer, just move on to the next question. Just make sure that at least you have an answer out for every question because an answer is better than no answer at all. So this is the end of the online lesson for inference of content. Inference of content is the most basic SBQ skill that we learn. I hope this online lesson has been helpful to you. Bye!